Now we gradually move on to Josoor research update. As JI is involved in the research in the past, let's see the latest updates on the next session, moderated by Nicola McCullough, who is the subject expert at Josoor Institute. Now, let's connect with Josoor research update. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Dr. Swati, and thank you very much for the introduction. Lovely. Well, good morning, everybody, I suppose, from the UK. Here it's 10:30 in the morning. Good afternoon to colleagues around the world and certainly in the Middle East. I would like to introduce colleagues that we've been working with at the Josoor Institute from YouGov, YouGov Sport. I'd like to introduce into this session a colleague, Sara Eddleston, who is the Head of Sport, Consumer and Insights at YouGov, and she is based in London at the moment, and with Scott Fritz as well, who is a commercial consultant at YouGov Sport, who is currently based in the Middle East. Welcome, colleagues. Thank you very much for being here for this session this morning. What we'd really like to do, I suppose, is open up the session and I suppose present an overview around the, I suppose, current trends or your current perceptions really of activities that you're undertaking in and around the sports and events industry. Again, you know, globally, this doesn't just have to be regarding the Middle East. I think we'll get on to speaking more specifically about the Middle East as we go through the discussion. So, Scott, I suppose over to you. It would be great to hear some of your insights, I think, as the opening comments.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nicola, and to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon from Dubai. As Nicola mentioned, I'm a senior group consultant here at YouGov, and I work within our sport, leisure and entertainment, travel and tourism, and gaming and esports sectors. And we've been working with Josoor for the last year to undertake quite a big number of research across the Middle East. And I think Sara will get into more detail, Nicola, on what that overview looks like. But I guess a bit more about us as a business. So we are YouGov, and as a part of that, we have specific sector within YouGov Sport, in which we have experts across the globe which work around commercial and sponsorship research with clients from rights owners like the MLS and NBA in the US to the Arabian Gulf League in the UAE to brands and partners that sponsor those leagues. And as YouGov, our business, our mission is to specifically to supply accurate and a continuous stream of data and insight into what the world thinks. And that's kind of what the formation of our name YouGov means, that you gov the decisions that take place in the world. And we do this so that companies and government and institutions can better serve the people and communities that sustain them. So we've been working with Josoor, one of our partners, over the last year, conducting, I guess, in threefold research projects focused on the Middle East. Two of those, of which we've built a focus on understanding sustainability within sports, events, and tourism industry. And then we've done about a number of 25 case studies across a range of topics, current topical trends in the industry, which are around sponsorship and legacy and volunteering, and of course, sustainability, sport diplomacy, risk management, and women in sport. So all these are very current topical trends that we've looked at. But I think what we'll focus on today are the two research projects we undertook, and the scope of how we undertook those were a bit different. So we ran interviews across 10 countries, professionals within the sport industry in the Middle East. And then we looked at a specific consumer study within consumers across Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia to understand what that looked like in terms of what consumers are aware within the market and what sustainability looks like. Now, I've been based here in Dubai now for, almost 9 years now. And it's been very interesting to see how events and organizations have grown and changed. And I think Qatar is one that's leading in those initiatives. So, I mean, even I think just before we were talking about the Qatar Stars League and, you know, making them a bit broader impact across the globe. And, you know, in terms of the QSL becoming the first carbon neutral league in the world, or aims to be, and to then run the first World Cup that is to be carbon neutral. So I think in terms of what is happening across the world in sustainability, it's quite exciting in the Middle East. And I think it's something that we're kind of showcasing through Qatar. There's been a lot that's been going on in the Middle East, and I maybe give a few examples later, but maybe I'll leave it to Nicola and Sara to talk more specifically about the research and maybe some of the overview outputs that have come out of that.
Thank you. Yes, Scott, that would be great. I think it'd be nice at the end to maybe wrap up some comments around that. And certainly I think moving forward around any gaps that we can see in the market as well, you know, in terms of moving forward, because obviously, you know, we've had a pandemic hit, not only in terms of the industries and the delivery of sports and events, but also in terms of research. And it's changed a lot of research focus now from where we were maybe 12 months ago to where we are now, this realignment activity that a lot of researchers are having to undertake as well. Sarah, can I invite you into the discussion? Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Just a little bit, I suppose, around the two key projects that were delivered alongside Josoor last year around sustainability. It would be great to kind of have a little bit of an overview of what the projects actually were, and also the process I think that you ran through in terms of undertaking them.
Thank you. So as Scott said, there were two studies that we undertook. One was focused towards the industry and perceptions in industry around what the developments are, but also, you know, what's happening in the countries and what they perceive to be the challenges with the general population. And the other one was more focused towards our online panels to look at consumers and ask them, you know, their thoughts about sustainability and perceptions, and how that looks around the sports and leisure industry. I think the most interesting thing to start off with is, as we were discussing this before we kicked off, was that the general perception amongst all of us actually was very much that it wasn't a very developed area. There wasn't much known about it, and awareness was very low. And indeed, when we spoke to people in industry, this became apparent that that was the same perception. Within industry, there are different levels across the 10 different countries that we looked at. And also in each different country, there are different levels of awareness and development. But actually, when you speak to the consumers, they're very well aware. Whether they do anything about it is the challenge. So I think one of the big challenges and the findings we have out of this is that awareness is a barrier, but in the way that it's not fully understood, and nor do people actually care enough to be compliant. And then when it comes to business, and this ties in as well, because the commercial facing element of this is people are aware, because it's become very well ingrained in country visions, that at a country level, these things are developing and at a pace. You've got the World Cup in the UAE, you've got Expo, the very high profile, but when it comes down to individual businesses that aren't government supported or led, the challenge commercially is to make it viable, because it's still quite expensive to use sustainable products or implement anything else. And then on a larger scale, there's infrastructure, of course. So around the region, there are a lot of old stadia that have not, and I know Qatar's tacked this for the World Cup, but there's a lot of old infrastructure that is probably slightly too old, or is going to need a lot of investment to update with sustainable practices.
Yeah, and do you think there's also been alongside that, in terms of organisers and the perception of how organisers are shifting their focus to want to be more sustainable in terms of their event delivery, do you think there's also a shift in focus now around, and a cultural focus, I suppose, for the consumers as well, like you said, that there's almost a rebadging of events, not only to demonstrate that they are trying to be sustainable, but I think there's an expectation now that people expect it to be.
Yeah.
To have that green badge in terms of what they're delivering and how they're delivering the event.
I think there's a huge will and a yearning almost that this is the case. What we did find when we were doing all the research is it's very hard to find any kind of published evidence. So consumers can see with their own eyes when they go to an event, recycling bins and what have you, but really promoting these values and these developments is actually not great. World Cup's doing it fantastically well. Expo's doing it fantastically well. We look at Saudi, we've got NEOM. All these big developments are doing it very well. But if you take a step back into just more general everyday lives, it's not that well published at all. So it's a challenge for the industry, definitely. And it's because the sports industry has a fantastic platform for this, and it's an easy one to tackle as well.
And I was just going to say, and that's exactly, I think, what's happening is it's almost at the forefront, isn't it, of how that mindset and that culture shift might happen based on how successful, you know, some of these major events and mega events are going to be delivered across the Middle East.
Yeah.
I want to bring Scott in here. Scott, do you see a similar pattern across other Middle Eastern countries? Because again, I'm conscious that your remit very much, you know, covers around the region. Is it something that is quite unique to Qatar at the minute, or that they're very much kind of I suppose shining the light on this area because of, you know, what's coming up next year? Are you seeing a similar pattern now moving across other countries in terms of sustainability?
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I was actually going to chime in there and say a few comments, but I think to Sara's comment around like the events and how it's publicized, I think that's where it becomes what looks like the Middle East being, I guess, an immature market from that perspective. So where you have alternative markets in Europe and the Americas that are utilizing and leveraging something like green initiatives or sustainable initiatives within sport, they're using it also from a commercial element. So from both the perspective of the consumer and the sponsor or commercial side, you see more of that happening outside of the Middle East. So I think that's something within the Middle East that can be developed further. I mean, as Sara has mentioned, some of these high profile events, it kind of comes as a part of that or a requirement within that. So someone like FIFA or someone like, or an event like Expo, where that's kind of the nature of what they're doing and the excitement around it, it kind of gives them that ability to leverage that. And I think that's where there's a bit of a gap. So you have, as Sara mentioned, like the awareness of sustainability from the consumer side. So it's both a bit more of an educational perspective on what you need to do in terms of educating the market on what these initiatives are and why they're important and how they impact. And then the other side is using it from a marketing and commercial perspective to highlight those. So I think we've seen within some of the research that, you know, there's no negative side to promoting some of the exciting things that you're doing within sustainability. But at the same time, if the consumer isn't aware that it is a positive impact or what impact it's having on them individually or from the event or how it's impacting the community, I think that's where there's a gap that can be filled. And I think that's where the market needs to mature a bit. But I guess to your question on kind of what's leading those initiatives, I think Qatar seems to have taken a lot of those steps in developing in those areas. I mean, I think the UAE has been a bit more advantaged in just the fact that they've been able to hold more of these events. But I think as we've seen, more have gone to Qatar and the bigger events are moving into Qatar. And you see Saudi Arabia as well, with even events like the Formula E and some initiatives they built around that, the golf events and others, and in Qatar with the tennis championships and the motor racing events. So I think the UAE has maybe a few more example of those and leverage those a bit, but I think there's a bit more education that needs to happen, like at the consumer level in Qatar and Saudi in particular.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Scott. In terms of just going back to the report, Sara, was there any, I suppose, key principles or guiding principles that kind of came as the conclusions or some of the recommendations from the reports? And I'm thinking here sort of across both areas in terms of, you know, sports consumers and sports fans, but also, you know, to businesses that work in these sectors. Was there any sort of key messages that really came out in terms of very clear recommendations?
Yes, and it comes back to, you know, just kind of managing what you can control. So the awareness part is the biggest part, and communications should be tackled because it starts with the education, Scott's just said. There needs to be more of a connect between government and industry, and that is where the genuine disconnect is. How that is tackled, I mean, that's obviously for discussion and development and ongoing development. But those are the biggest things because, you know, outside of that, it's very difficult to control it if the investment is not there. So sport has got this platform and it can be done from, you know, digital ticketing to communications at every single touch point along the consumer journey. Everything that you can control should be leveraged. So that's the main thing at the moment. It's the easiest thing.
And I suppose thinking about the current, place where we are in terms of the pandemic as well, do you think that's maybe had an impact on people's perceptions of sustainability? For the past 12 months, obviously we've been in a very time of change across definitely the sports and events sectors. Do you think that also adds to people's perceptions changing a little bit in terms of sustainability, or do you think this is something now that's very much embedded in both those industries, and to some degree obviously it has been affected because we've not had events being able to be delivered for quite a significant time, but do you think it's still as important as, even as we're coming hopefully through the pandemic itself?
I think it is as important. I think what actually this pandemic has done is raise the awareness of it, because we've all seen news reports about reduction in carbon emissions everywhere, and this only serves for the good, and all of this can be leveraged for good communications. I think obviously we're all going to go through a period of what getting together looks like, absolutely. But these things need to work in side by side. They're not mutually distinguished. They need to work side by side, and it can be leveraged for the good, definitely.
And thinking about, I suppose, fans and sports consumers and people that go to sports events, again, thinking about some of the messages that you've said, it has to be about clear communication, it has to be about raising the awareness, maybe through cultural shifts as well. Have you, and do you currently perceive that there are significant changes in terms of their perceptions of attending events at the moment? I know obviously YouGov do a lot of work around sports fans and fan behaviour and fan engagement. Are you seeing that there's differences or similarities around that from where we were maybe pre-pandemic?
People are different, differs by country, differs by gender. There's a certain amount of worry and reticence, but in the main, people are quite desperate to get back to normal and quite desperate to get back into stadia and see their favourite games and matches played. So I think it's going to take for the rest of this year to see how that works out properly. We can't predict what's going to happen with this pandemic, but I think once things start to ease back into a more normal way, to be a new normal, yes, there is going to be probably some social distances, sanitizing, etc. And I think the communication around that is going to be equally as important.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Sarah. Can I just pick up on the case studies that you mentioned, some of the topics and themes, Scott, right at the beginning of the discussion. You highlighted kind of some areas there, around event protocol, around women in sport, event sponsorship, multi-agency working, lots of different areas that were covered across the 20 or so case studies from last year that you worked with Josoor on. Can I just ask you about, were there any, again, kind of key messages that came out from the case studies that you think will resonate more across the Middle East? I know that the focus of quite a few of the case studies was very much, based on Qatar and some of the great work happening in Qatar at the moment. But were there any kind of key messages that came out from the case studies more broadly?
I think just broadly looking at all the work that we did, across so many different subjects, I think one thing that was quite prevalent was, and I think this was mentioned in just the previous chat, was looking at kind of best practices and what's happening around the globe. So I think within all of the topics that were evaluated, that's something that was very important, is kind of looking at what those are and how we can apply those within the Middle East. Some of those are even been driven from here. So I think even mentioning, the stuff that the QSL is doing on carbon neutral. That's something that's new. Like, who's going to be the first league in the world to become carbon neutral is the QSL, which is just very exciting. And I think will raise the profile on that globally. So I think, across the different topics that we did, there was obviously some key areas we looked at, and even more broadly in terms of our sustainability look. I think the important thing was just looking at, and I think maybe going back to the research and your question around the COVID, is looking at awareness. And I just wanted to pick up on where Sara was just leaving off on that. But the UFC in Abu Dhabi just ran a fantastic event, which was called Fight Island. And I think one of the big things was, and there was no fans in attendance or that, but I think one thing that they made very clear and apparent was just a communication strategy around it. And I think that's what's going to really help to get people back in attendance at events. And we've seen events take place here in Qatar. I think we just had the tennis event in the last week, and in the UAE we've had golf events, a few select spectators in attendance, and I think that's going to be the important piece. And I think more broadly is a communication strategy, even as we mentioned before, around the sustainability element. So even within the research we did, what was very clear was what are the word associations when you think about sustainability, and a lot of those run eco and green, and so I think that's a great place to start, which we've seen with some of the events. So with events like the Formula E and the DP World Championship, we've seen more recycling taking place. We've seen more highlights around those specific areas, around water usage, and just becoming more environmentally friendly. Obviously, sustainability has a much more broader impetus to it, but I think that's a great place to start. And I think that's something that, looking at everything that we've done, that I think that's something is looking at just the awareness and the communication strategy around it. Because I think that's the most important piece, is how you build and communicate that. I mean, even we've seen with one of our clients here in the Middle East, the Coca-Cola Arena, like they have so many things that they've done to make sustainability an important piece of what they've done, whether it's implementing certain types of AC units or LEDs that don't use as much energy, or sensors for toilets and water usage, or organic composting. And I think if you don't understand what the consumer understands about this and how it helps, it makes it very difficult to communicate that. But I think, more broadly looking at everything that's happening around the Middle East, there's a lot of, exciting things that are happening. And I think, and I hope that people can look and read our study and evaluate what that is to help, certain events and rights owners to utilize that, because I think it's very important. And there are things that are happening that can be communicated in ways that we're leading in terms of development in the Middle East. And as Sara mentioned, there's stadiums that are old and that need to be renovated. There's things that need to be done from an infrastructure perspective, which obviously brings costs and it's difficult. But there's a lot of things that I think we're doing right. And also I think that within the events industry and tourism and around sports and entertainment, I think it just needs to be more communication around that, and education, I think, is kind of the main piece. And looking at the case studies in particular, I think that's the exciting thing about what we've done with you all over the last years, is just educating everyone about what's out there and what are people doing within women in sport, and how can we develop, just speaking specifically on one topic, but we've done a number of different case studies around that. So I think just educating everyone, and read the case studies and read the report, and what can you do? And I think even in particular on that, like women in sport, the Gulf countries have been amazing in changing that and bringing more women into empowerment in terms of leading organizations and initiatives. And so I think just looking at everything that we've done from like the case study perspective, and just pulling those best practices into what we do within, I mean, there's a number of participants here with work across probably a number of different areas, whether it's sport or entertainment or various organizations, that we kind of take that and implement that into what we're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott. And you're quite right in saying what you're saying around industry as well. And the mantra in industry at the minute is that it is moving and changing and adapting and trying to be flexible in terms of, thinking about how they can be, not only promote themselves as being sustainable, but how they can utilize and start to think about, realigning how they deliver events to be more sustainable. So I think certainly from the reports, there's very much a sense of, this is need to know information. This is, this really does need to be communicated. But certainly speaking to people in industry, I think there's also it definitely resonates with them, and they definitely see the importance of it, which is great. And as we said at the beginning, there's slowly this shift now, I suppose, in terms of culture, and people, really identifying the importance, not only when they go to an event or when they're watching sport, but also seeing it, as you said, in their daily lives and how they go about their lives as well. No, thank you very much for those insights. I think just finishing off, because I'm conscious of time, which has gone super quick. Just finishing off a little bit, just for the last couple of minutes, it would be really nice to hear about any areas that you're focusing on in terms of the Middle East. Are there any topics or any specific areas that you're looking at, particularly this year, and maybe thinking about the next 2 to 5 years? I'm thinking, obviously, I think the pandemic might feature in terms of some of the studies that you're doing, but is there any key areas or specific areas that YouGov will be concentrating on in the not too distant future?
Well, and I think that's it. I think the pandemic has kind of consumed us all, whether we want to believe that or not. But I think from our perspective, I mean, we work with a lot of clients across the region here, and I think that will probably be one of the most important things. I think just the previous chat with our friends from IMG and AC Milan is, looking at the looking at the revenue that has been impacted. I mean, that obviously that makes a huge difference on what can be done and accomplished from an organization perspective. So getting fans into the seats and back into the stadium makes an impact on obviously ticket sales and revenue and consumers, which is very important. So, I mean, we've done a lot of work over the last year, ever since we implemented our research around COVID and built a tracker to evaluate consumer perception, not just for sports, but for everything. I think just in terms of travel sentiment and where do people want to go and what do they want to do, and how can you build confidence to get them back out there. So I think, a lot of the work that we've done recently and will do in the near term will be looking at that and how to build confidence within the consumer to come back to the stadiums. I mean, we've been at attendance at a number of the events at the Coca-Cola Arena or the Formula One event or the golf event. And, we had fans in attendance last year and we were able to talk to them about those events, but now we don't. And that's where, a lot of those organizations kind of lean on us to speak to our panels, which are all online, and we talk to them daily about a number of different things that we can kind of help understand how can we get people back to events and what's going to drive them to go and what's going to see. I think the one thing that's come out of it has been pretty exciting is just the ability to leverage e-attendance or e-sourcing of kind of everything that's done. So I think that'll lead to maybe a bit more development. So I think in the long term, that should make a big impact in terms of, yes, we want to bring people back, but at the same time, we can also provide routes and mechanisms to provide people a similar viewing experience. I mean, I don't know if Qatar did the same, but I think the UAE implemented viewership, seats, and fan noise, and kind of all the excitement that came to the original event that you felt. So I hope that will help leverage and lean on that. But I think going back to your original question, I think that's going to be the main piece of topic and something that we're looking at for the next, I think, foreseeable, let's say foreseeable year, hopefully sooner. But getting people out and back at events that's what brings excitement, is attending sport events and seeing them in person. So obviously we have the World Cup coming up, which I hope by then we'll have plenty of people around to see.
Yeah, and what's been nice, I think, today, and certainly in some of the earlier sessions as part of the HIWAR event, has been a lot of commentary around the concept of hybrid events as well, and the delivery of hybrid, and how almost the digitization now of certain events is being complemented by face-to-face events and people still being able to be in stadiums. So how are these kind of two worlds coming together in terms of sports events, in terms of fans really engaging on the digital side of the event delivery, but also being in a stadium to actually experience the atmosphere and everything that comes alongside being live at a sporting event. So I think you're absolutely right, Scott, and it's really great to hear that that's kind of going to be a key focus for you guys for the next year or so. There's just one comment in the Q&A that I'd just like to mention to you. Somebody's requested to possibly get involved with volunteering and being part of studies that you guys are involved with. Do you have a process, or is there a way that anybody can sign up and be involved with some of the studies that you deliver? Sara?
Yes, absolutely. So we have the YouGov site where you can sign up to be a panelist. I can share the link, but yeah, be involved. It's all about having your voice heard.
Perfect. No, thank you for that, Sara. And another question's just popped in regarding the Arab Cup that will be hosted in Qatar later this year. The comment is around reducing carbon emissions in terms of not only the World Cup in 2022, but is the expectation that the Arab Cup will also be of a similar status, that they would look to try and champion reducing carbon emissions for that event as well. I don't know if either of you have a comment on that.
We're certainly aiming to reduce them, but I think the two key events that they're looking at being entirely carbon neutral. I think this likely, and I'm not involved in the discussions, but it's likely to be a more of a test event to see how can we reduce carbon emissions. And even the league itself has been on a track of progress to reach that as well. So, and they're slowly getting there. So I think it's step by step. And some of the events like this are perfect because you can leverage them to evaluate how can you perform better. So I don't know that there's a requirement there, but everything that's being done around that is organized and under what is governed by FIFA and the organizing committees to aim at more sustainable initiatives like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments there, Scott, and thank you for answering those two questions. We're only 3 minutes over time, so that's pretty good going, I think, for today. But thank you so much for being here, Sara and Scott. I know that the work that you guys do with Josoor, but also the work more broadly that you cover across the Middle East is really vital, not only to industry but also to researchers and academics that work and are research active in these areas. So thank you very much for being here today. It's been great to see you both here. So thank you to everybody for attending. Again, thank you for your questions. It's been a pleasure to be with you here.